Good evening, everyone. The hour is 6 p.m. Having arrived, I'll call to order this special meeting of the Municipal Services Facilities and Infrastructure Committee. I have a little preamble here, so just bear with me. This meeting is being broadcast live on the City of Keene YouTube channel and channel 1302. The video is also streamed on the city's website and is posted on the website by the end of the next business day, barring any technical difficulties. Copies of the printed agenda are available in the wall pocket as you enter the room. It's basically behind the TV on the wall. So if you want a copy of the agenda, that's where it is. We have, I believe, 8 or 9 items on the agenda tonight. The public will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks will be made through the chair, which is myself tonight. I will not recognize an individual for the second time until everyone who wishes to have a chance to speak has spoken. Anyone who wishes to address the committee will be asked to go up to one of the microphones in the room, identify themselves by name and address prior to speaking, please. The minute taker is participating remotely this evening, so committee members, make sure you have your microphone on when you're speaking. If the minute taker is unable to hear, they will ask you to speak louder, and they will ask, or turn on your microphone. I now call the special meeting of the MSFI committee meeting to order and declare a quorum present. Chairman Greenwald is on a vacation in a place much warmer than us right now, so good luck to him. In the meantime, we'll get the party started. So, the first item on the agenda is a letter from Healthcare, Hospice, and Community Services on a no parking issue. Who would like to speak to that, please? Is your microphone on?
Can you turn on your microphone, please?
Green light's on, we're all set to go. Okay.
Okay, we'll start again then.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Susan Ashworth with Home Healthcare, Hospice, and Community Services at 312 Marlborough Street here in Keene. We are petitioning the committee to put no parking on either side of our entrance at 312 Marlborough Street. We feel this is necessary for the safety of the participants who are coming to our building, which includes members of the Keene Senior Center, the Friendly Meals Program for older adults, the gerontologist who works at our building, our foot care clinics, and many other services that involved older and disabled adults. We have many people coming, including in their own cars, but we also have Meals on Wheels drivers who are exiting this and entering this driveway, as well as the City Express. It's now a bus stop, so the bus is coming in 9 times a day in order to have passengers get off at our building and at the senior center.
Okay.
We have had numerous close calls at this juncture, and we feel for the safety of all, it would be very proactive of us to have no parking on either side of the entrance of our driveway. I'd also like to mention that Kim Rummerl, who is the director of the Keene Senior Center, is here this evening on behalf of the participants in her program, and Maura McQueenie, who is our CEO, to support this request.
Okay. Okay. City staff, who would like to address this issue of city staff? Don, come on down. You can hold tight if you'd like, just in case we have some more questions. Don doesn't mind standing.
I absolutely do not.
Or,
Good.
Hopefully, Logan can bring up some graphics that
do you have some graphics? You can swing up another chair, or we can just switch chairs. I didn't realize you had a show to show, so. No problem.
Sorry, I didn't mean to boot you.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don Lucia, Public Works Director. So, you know, this, and we have spoken to HCS about this request. It's very similar to some requests that this committee has heard from businesses on Court Street and on Washington Street, where there's, you know, traffic into and out of a property. Maybe there's a population that has difficulty with vision and whatnot. And we did look at those requests previously, and what we ended up, recommending was that they right now, the city code says you can't park in front of or near a private or public driveway entrance. It doesn't really define what near is. We've sort of recommended, and the council, I think, has agreed with the interpretation that near is going to be 5 feet. So 5 feet on either side of the driveway opening is what we kind of suggested. It's sort of a balancing of the competing interests for providing on-street parking, but also having visibility and safety when vehicles are coming and going. But in this case, I think it maybe is moot. So this graphic here is showing the existing conditions, and this is the driveway that we're talking about at 312. There probably, if we looked at this, there's not enough room for one vehicle to park here between this next driveway and this driveway, if we were, observing that 5-foot offset. But more to the point, this whole area is going to be reconstructed next summer as part of the Marlborough Street and Cheshire Trail Corridor project.
We can hold you to that next summer?
I will say that we did bid it in the fall. The bid that we got was really very, very high, so we did not accept that bid. But I am very optimistic that we'll get competitive bids this spring.
Okay.
And we're expecting that to be out on the street here in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
As part of that, what you can see here is, this is the same driveway for 312. The area that is now on-street parking lane on Marlborough Street will become, on the north side of Marlborough Street, will become a bike lane. So there won't be parking as of, the construction season next year. So to the west of the driveway entrance that we're talking about, that's going to be bike lane. To the east of the driveway entrance, this will be what we were referring to as chicane. You might have heard me talking about chicanes in the past. They're a traffic calming measure where you have horizontal deviations in the roadway alignment. And basically, the idea is, today, Marlborough Street is straight as an arrow, and that encourages, and it's very wide, it encourages people to drive above the speed limit. By adding in these curves, it forces folks to slow down as you maneuver through the roadway. So there's going to be a chicane located just to the east of this driveway. So you see this area that I highlighted in orange here. I guess that's actually doesn't show up on the screen when I'm pointing at it. Sorry. Maybe if I do this here. No. All right. The area in orange on the screen that's shaded will actually be paved with pavement markings to indicate no parking. And then about 50 feet east of the driveway entrance will be two designated parking areas. The thought was that may be an area where somebody wants to have a loading zone at some point, if there's a need for it. Right now, we don't see a need for it, but it's something that we could look at later. So in essence, once this project goes forward, there'll be no parking on their side of the street to the west, and on the east, it'll be a 50-foot offset from their driveway. So my suggestion, if you're so inclined, would be to refer this item to staff with the understanding that this implementation will occur during the construction season coming.
Okay.
Okay?
Questions from the committee at this point? No? Okay, any questions from the audience? Okay, would you like to add anything further to that?
Yeah, could I clarify when that construction season is? Because again, we don't want anything to happen prior to this construction taking place.
Yeah. So, like I said, we're going to put this out to bid here in the next couple weeks. Construction can start as early as early May, mid-May. That said, even if the council said, no, we want you to go do this right now, we could put signs up there, but we wouldn't be able to mark anything because of the pavement temperatures. And also to put up a sign and have it be enforceable, we would have to add this as a no parking zone to the ordinance, which is already like a 3 to 4 week process. So, even if we went that route, the earliest we could do something would be middle to end of February.
So at this point, we're optimistic for May construction period at this point?
I'm very optimistic.
Can hold you to that one.
Brian said it.
Okay. Anything further?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Either microphone, just name and address for the minute taker, please.
Kim Rumrill, Executive Director of the Keene Senior Center. And I just want to say that we did have 2 automobile accidents where members attempted to pull out of the driveway. And when you look to the left, you can't see anything coming. There's a large tree. And then if there's multiple vehicles on the left-hand side, even if it's 5 feet back, that's not enough. It needs to be even further back than that. You can't see, and by the time you've pulled out enough to see, someone can be right there. And I've had people come out and beep their horn and just barely, then have it to weave around me. So it is a really bad situation, and I don't think 5 feet is a large enough area.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any further comments? Anything else from the committee? Motion, please.
I'm not sure. I'm wondering about sort of some clarification. Is it the parking or is it the tree?
It is the parking.
Can you get back to the microphone?
Overall, it is the parking, and it's hard to picture as you're, sitting here, but you have the cars there, and the tree adds to the blocking in that sometimes if a car is far enough back and as you're driving up, you can kind of glance to the left, but the tree's there, so you have a very narrow area to try and see if cars coming, and you try and sneak up on it, and then you're like, oh, well, I didn't see any cars coming, and now I can't see anything, I'm gonna kind of go for it. So it's a combination. You don't have a tree on the right, so it's a little bit easier.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Move to recommend that the request for no parking at 312 Marlborough Street be referred to staff for implementation as part of the Marlborough Street and Cheshire Rail Trail project.
Second.
Motion moved and seconded. Any further comment? All those in favor? It passes 4-0. It'll go to the full council next week. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Don. Okay. Next item on the agenda is a letter from Kenneth and Diane Hitchcock, a request for a no tractor trailer sign up in their neighborhood. And welcome.
I'm Diane Hitchcock, 100 Woodland Avenue in Keene.
Okay.
And yes, I did submit the letter because we've had 3 issues this year of a tractor trailer going over our property. And the street is one of the narrowest in Keene, and it comes at an angle and they just can't make the corner, and they shouldn't be there anyway. And in 2023, there were 3 incidents, but they were during the day. So we were able to go out and stop them, and one guy knew he couldn't, so he backed up. That was fine. The next guy we stopped, he couldn't back up by himself, so we called the police, and they came and they helped him back up. The third time, the neighbor was going to help him back up. He ended up taking out another neighbor's mailbox. They ended up into a fisticuff, and so the police were called at that incident. And then this year, 2024, when it happened, the first one was 6:30 in the morning, and I saw the tractor trailer. I could not get out my front door fast enough to stop him. He flew around the corner and was down to Lorraine Street before I got out the door. And that moved the rocks probably 1 foot to 2 feet. So I let that go. The second time was 11 o'clock at night. I didn't hear it, but the next day we saw the damage, and we have cameras, and I ran it back, and I saw that. But again, there wasn't enough damage, so to speak, to bother. But this time, there was massive damage. Before I realized that it was city property, I had gotten an estimate of between $1,500 and $2,000 to have it fixed. And we've been up there 54 years come June, and never had a tractor trailer until 2023. And I think it's the GPSs. I don't know where that tractor trailer was headed when he came up. There is a police report. Whether the officer got that information or not, I don't know. But my assumption is that they are getting lost, and they see on their maps where the street goes around, so they go, oh, great, we can go around, but they just can't get around. So I don't know how else to curb it but a sign,
Okay.
so.
For the committee, when she talks about boulders, we're talking about massive boulders that get rolled out of the way. So this happens several times a year now, you're saying, over the last
Yeah.
few years?
Right.
Okay. City manager, city staff to address this?
I'm sorry, I can't,
For the record, Brian Ruff, city engineer. Engineering's looked at this intersection. Under the city's city code, trucks of this size are not permitted within neighborhoods. They're required to stay to essentially the number routes. We work with DOT with an oversized, overweight permit program. We review all the truck routes that would come into the city. We would never approve a truck route that would go through this neighborhood and make this turn. With that said, sorry, lost my train of thought for a second. I apologize. With that said, this damage that's being done is partially in the right-of-way. So even though it's not on the pavement, it's in the lawn, it looks like private property, it's still within the road right-of-way that's being damaged. So this is, in our opinion, more of an enforcement issue. This is already something that's not allowed. With that said, I looked very hard to find a advisory sign that could be installed at this location instead of an enforcement sign that would require additional enforcement that is not currently being adhered to. I couldn't find one that made sense. There is a possibility that a no through truck sign can be installed in this location, but again, that's something where trucks are already prohibited from traveling through this area. So the possibility, or I guess the downside in saying, okay, it makes sense to put a no through trucks at this location, is other locations will say we want a no through truck sign as well, where it's already disallowed and is already just a compliance issue, basically, so.
But I hear you. I did receive a call from Ms. Hitchcock a while back explaining the situation. And initially, I had thought this was just a one-time thing, but this isn't. This is a continuous problem in this small residential neighborhood. And it probably is GPS, but nonetheless, it's happening. So your only downside is to the sign is like somebody else might ask for one?
I'm not advocating against or for. I'm
Okay.
saying this is something that's already not allowed. If we install an enforcement sign, it becomes just another enforcement item that someone may ignore.
Yeah.
So it
Okay.
is what it is. Another possible solution is for that T intersection with a horizontal geometry the way it is, we could widen that curve and make it so trucks are able to get around that curve. There's room in the right-of-way to do that. It would be more costly than adding a sign. So those essentially are the options.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Having been up through that neighborhood, I don't think even suggesting to allow a trailer truck through that neighborhood makes any sense at all. And if a sign helps at all, so be it. I see no downside to that. Whether it's effective or not, who knows? My personal opinion is I don't see a downside, but that's just my opinion at this point.
can I just interject?
I'll let you interject. Go ahead.
Huh?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, he spoke about that there's already a law. The last guy that went around the corner and did all the damage was from Canada. I'm sure he doesn't know what the laws are in Keene, New Hampshire.
Right.
And I really believe that the trucks that are doing this are not local.
Right. Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. Go ahead first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is around if we're going to install a sign there. It sounds like what the problem is trucks that are not local not understanding the kind of dimensions of that road. And so I want to make sure that if we're putting a sign, we're not putting a sign where it's too late. They're already up that road realizing it's too narrow and are having trouble backing out and hitting someone's mailbox.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
So I think like that's going to influence my decision where we put the sign, because I want the sign to be useful as a deterrent, not I'm already halfway down this road and I'm too far in.
Okay. Lisa, go ahead. No, go ahead. You're good.
Thank you. My question is for city staff is, how would a driver, if I'm driving a tractor trailer, how would I know that that road is not, I'm not supposed to be on that road without a sign?
I would say you wouldn't until it's too late.
Okay.
Until you're at the point where you can't back up and you can't make the turn. And, yeah, so I would say it's about 500-600 feet up the road after the turn that you can't make the next right turn at that point. So there is no way. You're right, it's a good point.
So yeah, I think this is a pretty simple thing. We need a sign there to let people know. And
I'm sorry, she's not done yet.
I second what Councilor Favelis said about the placement of the sign. That was going to be my follow-up question.
Okay.
Thank you. I would agree that I think it sounds more like an awareness thing than an enforcement thing. It doesn't sound like people are going there and just disregarding information that they know. They're missing information, so I think being able to communicate that sounds like a good idea.
Any further questions from anybody in the audience? Come on down.
Ed Haas, 114 Jordan Road. Good evening. I'm curious, other hardscape solutions perhaps, maybe even as far as trees, more boulders, something that if somebody gets there and they immediately see that they can't make this turn, they can't get in there. I'm just wondering if any of that had been explored.
Well, I can answer that. Have you driven through her neighborhood?
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of those neighborhoods that you don't know till you're there that you're not going to make it.
Yeah,
I
well,
think that's
once
the
you-
problem. You know, by the time they get to where they're at, they're there.
But to discourage them from making the turn, if there was something obvious that we could do with hardscape, passive solutions are always much better than trying to regulate or with signage. So I would put that back to the Hitchcocks or to the neighborhood people, myself included. I live in that neighborhood. Let's see if we can come up with something, and the city engineer, see if we can come up with some kind of hardscape answers.
I guess I don't understand your.
Well, if there was, and this is not practical, of course, but if there was a big tree there, and then.
Right, but it's when they.
Okay,
turn-
let's go to the chair, please. I don't have it back and forth.
Yeah, sorry,
Ed,
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's after they turn, but something to discourage them from making that turn as far as a passive. As we just spoke about with the driveway situation, the geometry of the curbing is going to change there. That should solve that problem. And as, there possibly could say, I think city engineer alluded to it, that moving the curb out could discourage that kind of damage. So I'm be in favor of looking for if we can find some other hardscape solutions, and I myself will look. Thank you.
I don't like that one. Move to recommend the request for no tractor trailer traffic sign.
Down here. Get the second one. Right there.
Oh, yeah. Move to recommend the city manager be directed to install a sign alerting drivers to the existing truck route ordinance, i.e. no through trucks.
Second?
Motion's been moved and seconded. Any further comments? City manager?
One other thing that I can commit to do is I can follow up with the police department on the report to see if we can find out where they were going. And then I can enter into the GPS and see where it's directing them. And there's an ability to do an online form where you can submit that this is the wrong directions. And so I'll give a shot. I'll take a shot at that and see if I can figure it out.
And just staff get together with the neighborhood and find out where the best placement for the sign would be, the most effective place for the sign, as my fellow councilors alluded to. Okay, motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? 4-0. Thank you very much. This will go to the full council next week for a full vote.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda. Bear with me here. Let's see. It's a report for staff, a reduction of a speed limit on Roxbury Street. Public Works Director, or somebody representing Public Works? Don's taking a back seat on this one.
For the record, Brian Ruff, city engineer. I must have an old agenda. I got the overlay sidewalk is next, but it's neither here nor there.
We're on the third item, which is the staff report reduction of speed limit on Roxbury.
Understood. I can speak to that. There was a long discussion on this the last time at the last MSFI meeting. Engineering took a look at this with Public Works, and I couldn't drive that segment without feeling like I was going to tip over. So I thought it was prudent. There was already one cautionary sign for a curve at one end at Lincoln and Water Street, or Roxbury, excuse me, and we installed the second one at the other end in the interest of public safety. We met with we discussed this with the city manager. She agreed that it made sense. We also added 2 20-mile-per-hour advisory signs on either of those advisory sharp curve signs. So essentially, for the limits that were identified as being unsafe and requested as being reduced to 20 miles per hour, excuse me, we installed advisory signage to limit speeds to that, recommend that speed, essentially resolving this item expeditiously in the interest of public safety.
No, I just thought that it was an easy solution and something that we could do to improve the intersection, and made sense for us to go ahead and do it while we could.
Any comments from the committee at this point? No? Any comments from the audience? Okay, with that said, motion?
Move to recommend the report be accepted as informational.
Second.
Motion been moved and seconded. Further comments? All those in favor? 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now. My microphone in. Proposal to allow overlay of asphalt sidewalks. This is Don's turn.
Now it's my turn. I'm not going to be able to get away with it all night, Mr. Chair. Okay, so if Logan can bring up the graphics, we'll start with a little bit of background. I think on this committee, the current version of this committee, probably the only one who remembers the original conversation about this topic was the chair. Back in 2002, my predecessor was in front of MSFI talking about concrete versus asphalt sidewalks. And there was a fairly extensive discussion over the course of a few months. I would love to be able to tell you that, the discussion at that time has changed or wasn't correct, and that we really should be changing to asphalt sidewalks. But I think that the decision that the council came to at that time still holds. Concrete is still more expensive to install, but the life expectancy and the serviceable life of it is far greater. And on balance, the life cycle cost of the concrete actually works out to be a better investment. So that's unfortunate because they are very expensive. But we did want to talk to you about sort of I guess what we're pitching as an interim plan. It was almost 3 years ago now, we talked to this committee about a sidewalk asset management plan, and that was, again, was a conversation we had over the course of a couple of meetings, and we came up with some goals and some ranking criteria, if you recall. The goal in there to get our sidewalks to a condition or a level of service of C, which would, 60. Our goal was to replace a total of 11 and a half miles of unserviceable sidewalks. 9 of that was asphalt and 2.5 are concrete. Concrete, although, our existing inventory is about 29 miles of concrete, 23 miles of asphalt. The vast majority of sidewalks that are in poor condition are the asphalt. So last fall, I was back to give you all an update at the request of a counselor to talk about how we've progressed since the original asset management plan was adopted. From 2021 until last fall, we had completed a little over 10,000 linear feet of new sidewalks replacements. But mostly, that we kind of ran up the score, to be honest, with the Winchester Street project. Also, Roxbury Street project included a lot of sidewalk replacements. The amount of sidewalk replaced as part of the CIP's sidewalk replacement program was a small portion of that. Most of that footage was due to those big infrastructure projects. The current funding in the CIP allows us to replace between 1,300 and 1,500 linear feet a year. So, some quick math. If we got 23-ish miles of asphalt sidewalks that need replacing over time, it's going to take us 75 years to get all of them converted from asphalt to sidewalk to concrete. So that's not the most impressive number. But it's been a long-standing council policy, and I looked to find this in writing. I think it was agreed to as part of that discussion in 2002, 2003, but I couldn't find it in the meeting notes. But at least, urban legend down at Public Works has it that at that time, the council sort of agreed that repairs up to 100 feet could be done in kind. So if our guys are doing work on sidewalks, we can go up to 100 feet and just replace it with asphalt. But if we go more than that, the council really expects us to be using the standard, which is granite curbing and concrete sidewalks. And that's been kind of the rules of the game that we've been living with for the last 21 years. That limits how much our guys are actually able to work on sidewalks. So what we're proposing tonight, if the council is interested, would be a program of what I'm calling interim repairs. The idea is a low-cost Band-Aid over asphalt sidewalks that would give us 10 to 15 years of additional service life for those sidewalks. It would allow us to correct some of the ADA violations, tripping hazards, that sort of thing that we get a lot of complaints about. But I'm not pitching this as a replacement to concrete sidewalks. It is a corrective measure. It's a Band-Aid approach. That said, I think we could get a lot of traction and do a lot of additional work at fairly low cost. So the devil's in the details, of course. The idea is we would use city forces. It would be our own highway crew doing this work. Working with the highway superintendent, we think we can get about 1,500 feet of sidewalks overlaid each year. So, essentially, we would be doubling the amount of sidewalks that we're touching each year, either through replacements or these interim overlays. And the way we would actually execute that would most likely be done as part of the annual WOW program that we started in the fall. So, in each of the wards, we would isolate and find a few sidewalks that we could overlay and 1 or 2 days, they would put a crew on that, of that week, and they would address that, sidewalk in that neighborhood. So that's the idea. In terms of budget impact, the ongoing costs, we believe we can cover with our existing budget. In other words, there's budget in our operating budget for sidewalk maintenance, right? That's already included. The current operating budget consolidates a lot of line items. There used to be a specific line item for sidewalk maintenance. Now it's part of street maintenance. But those funds are in there, and we know that that's budget that's sort of earmarked for sidewalk work. This program would total about $7,500 a year in materials. That doesn't include the cost of the labor, but we would be doing it during normal business hours, and that time is already accounted for. The real cost would be the upfront cost to purchase the paving machine. So right now, we don't have a machine that's really designed or intended to be used to pave sidewalks. We recently acquired a used, what's called the drag box. It attaches to the back of one of our dump trucks, and it allows us to overlay roadways in a very similar kind of program. So for example, this summer on Hastings Ave, last summer, Hastings Ave was overlaid with the drag box. And, I think at very low cost, we were able to correct a lot of complaints and concerns with that roadway. So the guys have done a very, very good job using that equipment. We were able to find that used at pretty low cost. We would need to buy that machine gets as narrow as 8 feet, but it's not suitable to do sidewalks. So we would have to find something to do sidewalks specifically. And I show a picture here of one such machine. They do make these machines, new. We've also looked at used machines. If there's one available and, that this proposal moves forward, we would be looking first and foremost for trying to find a used machine, which would be towards the lower end of that scale. But if this program was to gain traction and the council decided that this is something they're interested in, we would come forward with a request for that initial purchase, and then ongoing continuation of the program would be done with our normal operating budget.
Thank you.
All right, and just a couple of examples of what we're kind of envisioning. Here's a photo from Court Street. The section between the Genesis facility and the Wright Estates is about 500 feet. Just to compare the cost to replace that with concrete would be about, given current pricing, about $62,500-ish. The cost to overlay with just the material cost would be about $2,500. Spring Street, which is in pretty rough shape, 900 feet long. Replacing that sidewalk with concrete would be about $112,000. Overlaying it would be a little over $4,000. So you can see it is pretty substantial difference in costs. This is Main Street from Elliott to Baker. That section there is in need of some repairs. Cost of overlay, almost $140,000. The cost of replacement with concrete would be almost $140,000, and overlaying it would only cost about $5,000. So that's the motivation behind this request, and I'd love to take your questions.
Thank you. You're right, it was 23 years ago, but I remember the conversation. I was part of it. In my recollection of it was, at that time, it was basically use concrete where applicable. We wanted it to, especially in the heavy traffic areas, but in my recollection, it was never automatically going to be concrete. It was one of those ongoing discussions. So that's how I remember it, that it was never a definite. It was just if we could afford it. And of course, affordability comes into a lot of this. I did receive a couple of calls from some constituents today. They were a little confused. They thought that if there was some damage to some concrete, you were going to overlay it with asphalt. And I said, no, that's not the case. This is the case of, as you're showing right here, asphalt for asphalt, correct?
Yeah, and to your first point, the concrete standard was actually codified. That is in city code.
Okay.
It's now as part of the land development code. So any replacements that we do, we do with
The
concrete.
new replacements.
Yeah.
Right.
No matter the neighborhood, we do it with concrete. New developments that come in have to provide sidewalk on at least one side of the street, depending on the district, and that is going to be concrete. And like you said, this is not intended to be a replacement of that standard. It's really just to an adjunct.
Well, like I said, I remember part of the conversation being, especially as you get farther out in Keene, some of the sidewalks weren't as heavily used. It made no sense
Yeah.
putting in concrete when, anyhow, another story for another day. So, obviously, this is, the asphalt's a much lesser cost to the taxpayers.
Yeah.
No doubt. Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question about how many feet, or about how many feet of sidewalk is in fair or poor condition?
So when we did the sidewalk asset management plan, we had identified 9.5 miles of asphalt sidewalk that met that criteria, that were fair or worse. Now, some of those 9.5 miles are beyond poor, right? In other words, they wouldn't be candidates for overlaying. One example that I could think of off the top of my head would be Franklin Street. That street is sidewalk is deteriorated to the point where overlaying it probably doesn't make sense. You would have 6 inches of asphalt in some spots and nothing in others. It's just too far gone. That's not really the intention of this program. The examples that we show here are kind of what we're looking for. It's been patched, there's puddles, there's settlement. Those are the sorts of defects that we can correct with its overlay. So the short answer to your question is I don't know what portion of the 9.5 miles would qualify, but it's some portion of that 9.5 miles.
So I'm trying to think of how to frame this question, but it's basically how long, at what point does asphalt meet concrete? So how many repairs, when we talk about, I think you said 75 years that it would take to bring everything up to up to C, I think you said.
Right.
So presumably in that time, could something receive more than one overlay?
It's unlikely, just because if you get more than one overlay, you're talking about, fairly significant grade changes. So, typically the overlay is going to be 1.5 inches to 2 inches. So we have to, part of the project selection criteria is areas where we can add that 1.5 to 2 inches without creating drainage problems or, creating a problem where a neighbor's driveway doesn't drain properly or their front yard is collecting water, that sort of thing. So, again, this is sort of a policy discussion. Selecting individual locations to implement it is a lot more detailed. But to do that twice on the same section of sidewalk, now you're talking about 3 to 4 inches of additional thickness. Probably a lot fewer would be able to do that without creating drainage problems.
Just to clarify, I think I wasn't, and maybe I phrased that incorrectly, but I'm not really asking if we would want to keep doing that, but if the goal were to bring all sidewalks up to grade C, presumably this would bring some up for a little while. So would that bring us to, say, all sidewalks would be at grade C in 50 years? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah,
Does that make
it's
sense?
a
Okay.
great question. I have to confess, I didn't think about that. I
Okay.
would have to play with some spreadsheets.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something I'd have to look at and get back to you.
More questions from the committee? Any questions? Any questions from the audience? Let's not fight here. Come on down.
Jay Kahn, Mayor. So I don't want to offer a question. I just want to offer a neighborhood story that hopefully adds some color to this beyond just how many years and the conversion rate between asphalt and concrete. I live on Darling Road. There's a section of Darling Road, about half of the street, that is asphalt paved. but the residents never use it. And people walk quite a bit on the street. There are a lot of pets, and never use it. And I'll give you the story of my neighbor. My neighbor has lost her eyesight. She has a guide dog that she requires to walk, and she does so every day to exercise the dog and herself. She walks in the street because the 30-year-old sidewalk, it's at least 30 and probably 35, is so uneven and broken up, a lot like the Spring Street illustration that the director just showed. It's so broken up that she won't use it, nor will any of the other residents. Very seldom I try to use it. I don't like walking in the street around curves, but the residents primarily prefer the street, the level surface, to the unlevel surface that has a lot of cracks in it. Public Works tried to work on this summer. I appreciate their effort, but it was the old technique of dropping asphalt, pounding it into the surface, rolling something over it, and in the end, leaving a fairly uneven surface nonetheless. So I think the director is bringing forward an idea that is necessary, and I think the criteria is not just where it's broken up. It's where residents are most inconvenienced, and it is throughout the city. I just want to add to that the color of residential experiences, so that you see that there's a real impact of not moving ahead with a replacement schedule that is more responsive to the needs of our constituents. Thank you very much.
City Manager.
Yeah, I just wanted to recognize and thank the Public Works Director for bringing this forward. We're always trying to stretch the dollars as far as we possibly can. And, since he's taken on this role, he has been looking at old policies and different ways of doing things. And so I really appreciate that. Sidewalks is a topic that we talk about quite often, and it is a complaint that we hear about quite often. So I'm actually very excited about this. This is a visible, tangible improvement that we can do at relatively low cost.
Thank you. I can confirm that the longer you're on council, what goes around comes around, and for those of you that are going to be around for a while, this will repeat. So in 75 years, when we're still here, we'll see if these sidewalks are still holding up. Any further comments? Okay, good. Motion?
Move to recommend that the city manager be authorized to develop and implement a program to overlay existing asphalt sidewalks in fair or poor condition using city forces.
Second.
Motion's moved and seconded. Any further comment? All those in favor? 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For my next harebrained idea,
You're on. Stop
the
signs.
next item on your agenda is a discussion I'd like to have with you
Protection of streets.
about the protection of streets. So, it's sort of like a foregone conclusion down at Public Works that as soon as we pave a street, somebody's going to have a sewer service that fails and it's going to get dug up, or the gas company is going to have a leak that they're going to have to dig up. It seems to be inevitable. So what other communities have done to sort of discourage that sort of problem is they've implemented what most of them refer to as a protection of streets ordinance in their city and town rules. The idea is that for a period of 5 years after the city invests in the roadway, that there's an umbrella of protection sort of placed over that roadway. And what most of them do, I've looked at a few different cities, the way they've done it. What a lot of them do is for the first 2 years, if you have to cut that roadway to make a repair or put in a new service or whatnot, you're going to have to pay a damage fee at 3 times the normal rate. Between year 2 and year 5, if you have to cut into it, you're going to pay twice the normal rate. So it sort of tapers off over time, and after 5 years, you would just pay a normal, what everybody pays. The idea is that, we announce the roadway paving program at least a year in advance. We tell people that this is going to happen. We encourage them to have their sewer service inspected, or if they know that they're going to be building on a vacant parcel, to extend utilities to that vacant parcel in advance. Give them an opportunity to make those corrections and repairs, and then try to minimize the amount of damage to new pavement that we have. I will say that over the last several years, the utility companies have actually been very cooperative and helpful with this. And I will say Liberty in particular has been doing an excellent job of taking our paving list and then going into those neighborhoods in the year or 2 years before. And if they've got to replace mains, they replace the mains. If they've got old services that they need to cap off, they'll do that in advance. So that coordination has been very productive and is going very well. But it's still a concern, and it's something I would love to see a way of discouraging.
Questions from the committee? Go ahead.
Thank you. I don't want to get too in the weeds here without seeing kind of a draft ordinance or deciding. But an immediate question that comes to my mind as I read through kind of the first part of this report is, who is the arbiter of whether, no other reasonable option is available to provide services to new buildings? Kind of who is the person that decides that?
So right now, the city code gives that authority to the Public Works Director. In practice, the city engineer administers the road excavation permit program. So, for example, if your home's lateral service for your sewer failed tonight, right now we're in a pavement excavation moratorium, winter shutdown, if you will. And we do that during the winter months because contractors don't have the option of getting asphalt, hot mix asphalt this time of year. That I guess they do. The closest batch plant that makes hot mix asphalt is in Dracut, Mass. So most contractors don't have the trucks or the wherewithal to drive to Dracut to get a truck full of asphalt to make the patch. So in effect, when there are emergency repairs, the contractors have to babysit that patch through the winter, and they put gravel on it, or they put cold mix on it, but every few days or every storm they have to go fix it. I think this would work basically the same way. If there's a emergency repair that needs to be made, the bottom line is nobody in my office is going to tell somebody that they can't flush their toilet for 5 years, right? So things are still going to happen, and these repairs are going to have to be done. We're not going to tell the gas company that they can't fix a leak. But the idea is that we would collect this damage fee. If the proposal moves forward, my recommendation is that those damage fees that we collect would be set aside for roadway maintenance. And we have a capital reserve for that purpose already. My suggestion is that money goes into that capital reserve, and then it's available for repairs, crack sealing, we can do infrared, we can do mill and fill repairs on it later on. But that's how we would sort of get through it.
Any further questions from the committee? Go ahead.
I have 2 quick questions, if that's okay. One was, how often does something urgent happen, where you wouldn't be able to plan with a year advance?
So I don't know if it's the right answer to your question, but for example, with the winter work, pretty much every week we have a contractor coming in because somebody's sewer is backed up and they need to dig in the street. That is not uncommon, unfortunately. And again, we obviously can't tell people, tough noogies, wait until April. So that happens, and contractors are required to keep that patch up to snuff until they can get hot mix in it. With this program, if we went this way, we would be pretty aggressive in announcing what streets we're going to be paving the next year, and giving people, like I said, at least 12 months to have their service inspected. If they know that there's a problem and they've got to have Roto-Rooter come out to clean their line every 2 weeks, we would encourage them to get that work done in advance, so we wouldn't have to charge them that extra fee. The idea is not to collect extra fees in the form of damage bonds or whatever. It's really to encourage people to make any underground work ahead of time, so we don't have to cut the road.
Okay. Can I ask one more? The other question I had was, this was protection of the streets. And then I heard you talk about roadway, which can sometimes have a different definition. So I just wanted to ask for clarification about that.
So, protection of streets is the verbiage that I got from Concord and Dover's ordinance. This would apply to both the actual travel surface of the roadway, plus any paved shoulders or whatnot, as well as in the case if there was like a new sidewalk, I think the same kind of thing would apply, or at least that would be my recommendation. If we put in a new sidewalk and the contractor has to dig it up, then we would want to collect extra fees to be able to babysit that and make sure that it gets put back correctly.
Good? Go ahead.
Thank you. I support this. However, I do want to make a point. I don't love that, the cost would come down to the property tax, the property owner. But one of the things in the communications that you send out a year in advance or so, I would like to ask, if it's not already being done, that you include some information on where to access, where property owners may be able to access some financial assistance if they do in fact end up needing some major repairs, just knowing that we have an aging population and a lot of folks on fixed incomes.
Understood. Thank you.
So I have a clarifying question about that, and then one of my own on a slightly different topic. So the way that I am reading this proposal, an emergency repair would be exempt from this fee now. So okay, then I think I would need to think some more about that. The second piece is that there is also something here, so when a situation arises that meets the criteria for an exception, the applicant is charged the fee or required to perform far more extensive restoration. I haven't heard that talked about. So
And that is not something I really love the idea of, but it's how Nashua does it. So, for example, you're having bad luck tonight, Counselor, but your sewer fails tonight, and you have to patch it. So the way Nashua handles it is, as part of the restoration of that patch, the contractor is required to excavate the full depth of the road base. So it goes down about 3 feet below the road surface. They have to excavate all of the material and build it back up in layers with all new gravels and crushed gravels and everything else. And the asphalt surface has to be patched from curb to curb, 20 feet in each direction from your patch. So not only are you excavating more in the roadway to replace the gravel that's disturbed, but you're also milling and overlaying a section of roadway that could be 50 feet long by the full width of the roadway. And I understand that their intent with doing that is it creates a much smoother surface and all the rest, but it also kind of inconveniences the rest of the traveling public for a much longer period of time. So it's not my preference of how we would do it, but that's another approach.
City Manager?
So when the Public Works Director first told me about this idea, I thought, oh, great. The utility companies are always cutting into our roads after we do a road project, and it's never right every time we fix it, or they fix it. And so I thought that was great. However, the concern that I have is related to emergency repairs for homeowners. And I'm also not excited, as Councilor Favalise, mentioned about a homeowner who doesn't know that their sewer is about to fail and needs to make a repair, paying 2 or 3 times the cost, which I don't really have a sense of what that is, because I think that emergencies are going to happen like that. And as Councilor Workman said, we have aging infrastructure, we have aging population, and I am concerned about someone who now didn't know they were going to have an expense to fix their sewer line to also have this additional charge on top of it. And so from there, we talked briefly about, is there a way for us to address that and add some language that basically says, okay, for emergencies, homeowners experience that they would be exempt. But the challenge to that is making sure we're treating utility companies and other contractors equal to how we're treating homeowners. And so, sorry to kind of ruin your momentum here tonight, but I do think that is something worth talking about a little bit more, and what sort of options we might have, and get some direction from the council as to how you would like to see this framed if we do in fact bring back an ordinance for you.
Are you basically asking for more time?
I'm basically asking for your input. If you have the same concern that I have related to how we're addressing the homeowner emergency repair, maybe the answer is seeking more creative ways to address that.
Right. Yeah, we want to get this done right the first time and not
Yeah,
not
yeah.
mess it up. I have no problem with a couple more weeks and to allow staff to hear a little bit more from not just the 4 of us, but the rest of the council also, as well as brainstorming,
Yeah.
through staff, because obviously we've got some open-ended questions here. So I have no problem with it going for a couple more weeks.
Okay.
We get it done right the first time. So,
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
The manager raised a good point, and I should have put this in my memo, I apologize. In terms of like, what does that 2 or 3 times mean? So Dover, and I'm probably going to get this backwards, but Dover charges $5 per square foot for the damage bond. That's on every excavation. Concord charges $7, or vice versa, I forget. So a typical excavation would be, let's just call it like 5 feet by 20 feet. If the utility that you're connecting to is on the other side of the road, that would be about, just to make the math easy. So 100 square feet, $500 would be the normal bond. That is also what we currently charge as a security deposit, $500. So in if we went forward with something like this, we'd be talking about $1,000 or $1,500 as the fee. The current program that we have, though, the way we do it now is we collect a security bond, we hold it for 1 year. After a year, one of my staff will go out and look at the patch, make sure that everything is still holding up, and if it is, we release those funds back to the contractor. One thing that has always kind of given me a little concern is I suspect there are contractors out there that don't tell their clients that money comes back to them if they did their job properly. So that probably is money that the homeowners are currently, not seeing come back to them. So, for context.
okay, yeah, I appreciate all the comment and everything, but being this is going to go on more time, I think let's just cut to the chase here, and no sense to be going on anymore and asking more questions, because you're going to have to come back before us anyhow, because before we can get a first reading, we have to have an ordinance. So with that said, as chair, I'm moving we put this on more time.
Second?
Moved and second. Any further comments from the committee? All those in favor of more time? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And.
Again, right now anyhow, because we have a stop
Nope,
sign to talk
nope,
about.
I'm out.
You're out of there? Rotating turns here?
Just gonna load up the visual for the record. Brian Roth, city engineer. Can you pull up the screen? Sorry. Okay. It's not showing on the screen.
Those are new colored stop signs?
Yeah, pretty nice.
Well, we're all familiar with the intersection is. You can just
Sure,
start with the
and
presentation.
there's visuals in your packet too,
Yeah,
so
we're
we
good.
can move forward with this. So the Public Works Department received an anonymous request through our C-Click Fix reporting system for the installation of a stop sign recommendation at the triangle intersection with Gilsum Street and Washington Street. At this location, there's currently an existing red flashing light for southbound traffic on Gilsum Street, which serves the same purpose as a proposed stop sign. Engineering Division did a review of this intersection, drove it a couple of times. It drives like a yield, basically. So all the cars going through there go right through it. I don't think it's anything deliberate. It's just how it drives. It's how it rides. So, but it is a stop. So when people are not stopping, and we looked at the line of sight, and essentially, if you look at in your packet the intersection overhead view, there's a section of parking where you lose the line of sight on Gilsum Street to see what's coming on Washington Street. And so I think that's probably the reason why that's a stop light on Gilsum Street for southbound traffic on Washington Street. Washington Street, at the same location, there's a yellow flashing light, which signifies a yield, which makes sense because if Gilsum Street can't see the traffic on Washington Street, then they need to yield there for traffic. So I think the lights make sense. The problem is people aren't obeying them. Interestingly enough, for this intersection, Gilsum Street at Washington Street is listed as in the city code as a yield, but this is again as a flashing red, which acts as a stop. So needs to be corrected either way in the city code. Our recommendation, because you lose that line of sight on Gilsum Street, is until we reconstruct that intersection of Gilsum and Washington, is that a stop sign in addition to the flashing red light be installed so cars stop there instead of continuing to drive through. So,
Sure. Okay. Questions from the committee? Any questions from the audience? Any questions from anybody? Got motion?
I move to recommend the city manager be directed to draft an ordinance adding a stop sign at the intersection of Gilsum Street and Washington Street.
Second. Motion's been moved and seconded. Further comments from the committee? All in favor? 4-0. Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. Finally, guys, I said it'd be quick. I lied. This is relating to the master boxes in an ordinance.
For the record, Jason Martin, Fire Chief.
And Rick Wood, City Fire Marshal and Building Official. So thank you for having us this evening. As you're aware, we're here tonight to discuss the proposed update to the city ordinance regarding fire alarm systems to facilitate a controlled decommissioning of the city-owned and maintained 100 milliamp wired master box system. Just for background, you know, we think about things and how long they've been around. The city master box system's been part of the department infrastructure since its approval November 10, 1885. It served the city for about 140 years, which is pretty impressive. In those days, the system was not only used to serve to alert the fire station of a problem, but it was also utilized by the responders because it is essentially built off of the telegraph system. So it had a teletype button in each box, and that's how we communicated back to the station to get more help. With virtually everything, there's been major iterations of technological advances that have provided viable options for the transmission of alarms as well as communication between the scene and our units and dispatch. The current system needs significant capital investment to maintain and update to ensure reliable service delivery is maintained. Given the challenges and the needs facing the city and the department, we've been reviewing and evaluating how do we best provide core mission services. My apologies, too many pieces of paper.
We know that problem.
So the impact, right, if we go ahead with this ordinance, the impact really, what it means is we currently have about 210 master boxes on the wired system. That means they're connected via wire to the receiving station over on Vernon Street. Each property location will be required to transition to one of the transmission methods allowed by the state fire code, so there would be an impact of that. There are 4 currently code-compliant options. Those code-compliant options are, one of them we operate currently as a city, is called a radio master box system, so it uses the radio frequencies to transmit the alarm instead of wires, and that's received at the dispatch center. That is one code-compliant way. There's a proprietary system, what they call a proprietary supervising system, and that means if I own a bunch of property, I can have an alarm receiving station that I monitor all of my properties, and then I call the fire department from there. That's utilized by companies like Walmart around the country. They monitor their own properties, and they alert the local responders. The remote supervising station is just a business that monitors your alarms. They charge a fee for service. They monitor your alarms. You transmit them via a variety of different pathways. It's up to you. And then there's a central station monitoring, which is a Underwriters Laboratories certified alarm receiving station. So it's a much more rigorous standard that's utilized by companies typically that require a higher level of certainty. Basically, those are the options for replacement. What we're trying to do is give you a flavor for what the execution looks like. So the execution really is focused on, the first step is soliciting an RFP, which we're in the process of, to do 2 things, right? Look at how do we make sure we get the economy of scale for city buildings, because we have approximately 12 buildings in the city that will require changes as well. But in addition, we're writing this RFP in a way that anybody who needs to change over their master box to a different system could use the same pricing that the city receives through this RFP. That RFP would be to go to the radio master box system, so it would still use our system, but it would go to radio transmission capable systems. That's one option. That's the first one I talked about. The other option is really for people, we're going to write to them, right, make them aware of this change. The idea is it will include a flyer, which we've worked on. So when if the ordinance is recommended and passed, we'll mail to every property owner that has a master box a letter indicating how it'll be engaged, at what timeline, what the deadlines are, how we can service and help them navigate the change. Right? In there will be a flyer explaining the options, as well as helping them understand from their perspective what the best choice is for solutions. Well, we're intending on hosting a couple of informational sessions to allow people to actually access us and ask questions about different options, because it's complicated for people. They don't really understand, right? And the goal here is to allow the end user to choose their system, right? Because one end user may feel like a more upfront cost in the beginning is better suited for them, while another may want a lower cost up front and a higher perpetual cost for maintenance. So we want to make sure that the end user gets that choice. And lastly, what we would do is really do a follow-up notice, right? 60 to 90 days out, to give people kind of a final reminder, hey, we're going to shut the system off on this date. These were the things, just to make sure that we don't leave anybody hanging. We know sometimes
You give people a lot of time, they kind of procrastinate a little bit, so we want to make sure we capture that as well. So that's our intent of how to go about this. And, you know, at this point, we were just thinking we could answer questions that you may have related to the draft ordinance or the ordinance that was proposed.
Okay. Questions of the committee at this point? Good.
Just a quick comment. I really appreciate that you came with this and also a communication plan. Every time you say end user, I get excited. And just the idea of having a plan to communicate and to help people figure out what the best option is, I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any further comments from the committee? Any comments from the audience?
Good evening, Jared Goodell, 39 Central Square. I just have a couple questions, if I can address through the chair to Mr. Wood,
Sure.
if you don't mind. The first would be there's some changes to the requirements of fire alarm systems in general. Specifically, Section 3493 talks about addressing and indication of things. And my concern is existing buildings that have systems that might, or portions of their system which might not be addressable, or that's sort of fire alarm talk, right? How does that affect? How does this ordinance affect existing systems, and particularly when a building might have a partial renovation? Would they need to upgrade or update their entire fire alarm system to comply with this new ordinance if their system does not comply with the requirements?
So
Go ahead.
the intent is to have the primary mechanism that we have in this state for existing buildings falls with the existing building code, which is the state building code, part of the state building code. That dictates what comes into play based on the level of work. So there's an actual methodology to that. So to answer it kind of blanketly and say no, never, that would be disingenuous, because the code does recognize that when you do certain levels of work, there's 3 different alteration levels. One is basically means that I'm changing minor things like finishes and things like that. Another is that I'm going to reconfigure my space. And then the last one is I'm reconfiguring more than 50% of my building floor area. So when you get to that third level of alteration, then there absolutely may be some kick in. In the first 2, not generally. It's only confined to what we call the work area, or the defined space being worked on. So it is limited for that purpose. This particular change you're referring to in 3493 is really focused on trying to bring us back to the idea of having consistency. Right now, we don't have any way to communicate to people when you should be doing voice. There's some very specific things called out in the panel when you get to different types of occupancies. So a great example, this is a point where you need a point enunciation. What that means is each device has its own address, so it can tell us exactly where the problem is. In older systems, the entire loop of wire is considered one device, so all you'd know is that X amount of floor area might be the second floor, for example. What this is doing is trying to indicate, look, when we get above a certain distance, we need this addressable. And the reason is because that has to do with responding efficiently to the actual alarm. So that's why. But the intent is not to go and you're doing a small renovation. It is not to invoke a different standard or to make you upgrade a full system.
Okay. Another question. In subsection G, there's new language that says that access to panels shall be for site management personnel approved by the fire marshal. Can you just explain that and what the intent is?
So currently, the way that the master box ordinance reads is that there is no ability for property owners to access the inside of their master box. What we're trying to do is shift the responsibility and the ability for property owners to maintain their systems, right? We don't need to be, we don't need to be the babysitter of the master box, for instance. The reason that was important when the master box was in play is because things you do inside the wired system can not only affect your box, but also affect the downstream boxes on the system. So if you go into the box and disconnect the wrong wire, you literally could take 50, 75 other clients offline. That's why we had a restriction. So what we're doing here is saying, when we don't have, this will only apply to radio master boxes in the future, right? Because that's all that'll be going in. there's no way you can take down additional clients, so therefore, we're saying, we don't need to manage access to that box anymore. You'll be able to manage it. The approval process is basically just to make sure that, that we don't have somebody who doesn't know how to navigate the box, right? And all it is, you know, if you're running a location that needs to be shut down, we would train you on how to do that, and then you'd essentially be approved. It's very similar to other types of things we do in the code industry.
And so that access is only for the radio box portion of the system, not the fire alarm portion?
That is correct. The access permit, where, again, you need to be able to manage your own, as a property manager, your own systems. So what we're trying to do right now, there's an access permit requirement that you'll find further down in the existing ordinance. That's being removed. And it's being removed because we feel like, because we're not taking anybody else offline, we don't need to be in the mix. And so that's what we're trying to do, is accomplish that removal of having an actual access permit and transitioning it back to the private vendor-initiated repair and modification process.
Further questions?
Yes. This is a fairly lengthy ordinance. Section 33105, and Mr. Wood just mentioned it's titled responsibility. He's proposing that be deleted in its entirety. And this section currently describes that the building owner pays for the installation of a radio alarm box, and then upon its activation, if you will, the box becomes property of the city upon its tie-in to the system, its wireless tie-in. And so that would change. And you know, I guess in theory, I'm not opposed to that, except that right now, folks who are in the system are paying an annual fee, and that they'll continue to pay the annual fee, but they will be responsible for the maintenance of the radio box and its good working condition. And so I just wonder if we're now taking the ownership away from the city and putting it on to the property owner, what is the annual fee going towards if it's not maintaining that module that they have?
So the prior annual fee and the current, the proposed annual fee is to remain the same. The point of the annual fee is not just necessarily maintenance, right? That was when we had to go out to boxes to be able to let you into the box. That's to monitor the system. We still have to do all that. We still have to monitor the system. And so that requires us, and we just had a capital project where we put in a second receiver, right? So that we'd have continuity. If one receiver goes down, we're still able to receive the signal. So that annual fee is to make sure that we can both receive and process your alarm signal when it's received. The reason 105 was removed is because, again, when we're dealing in a piece of infrastructure that's connected into a wired system that could take other people down, we needed that level of restriction. The code currently, as it's written in the state fire code, puts the responsibility for alarm systems and transmission of alarm systems on the property owner. So all we're really doing is reverting right back to the fire code. Now, there is a transition piece here, and that we intend to look at, is how do we transition, because we may need to realign the numbering of that box. Currently, we program the box when it comes in, and then we test it and make sure. So somebody installs it, we go out, we program it, and then we go and witness them testing it. The way that we're anticipating this to go is we don't need to do that anymore. We want to turn that over to the vendor as part of the RFP. They do their programming. We have very specific sequencing set up. They're aware of that. They program the box, so any vendor could buy a box, install it according to the vendor who's supplying the boxes, right, scheme, and then we go witness and test it. We have to permit every box installation anyway, so that allows a more efficient flow, and it allows, frankly, the ability for multiple vendors to be installing boxes instead of the city staff being in that loop.
I have another one. So Section 34106 is also being proposed to be deleted in its entirety, and this is titled Exceptions. And this code sort of aligns with, I think, a lot of building code in general, which essentially says that if a person might have a legacy system, or they have a building that maybe they can't really meet the true intent of this code, that they could apply to the fire marshal or the fire department for an exception, and as long as the intent could be met, that they could, be approved to have an alternative way to meet the intent. And, I think it's always good to have that flexibility. Fire alarm systems are very expensive. I'll give you an example. I just had to have a single pull station in a building fixed, an existing one, and it cost $4,000. That's just one of those pull stations on the wall. These companies that service these systems, they're not in Keene. They're proprietary systems. There's heavy programming involved. It's very expensive to do, and so I think that the council should consider allowing that exception paragraph to stay. That's just my comment on that. And if Mr. Wood wants to respond, I just have one more thing after that.
Yeah, if I may, the reason that exception is in there is because Section 3498 currently provides very explicit occupancies that must use the system currently. We're removing that. We're diverting right back to the state fire code, which we're obligated to follow by law anyway. So the exception would divert back to what the state fire code requirement or building code requirement is. And then there's a variance process embedded in there by statute. So that's why we're removing the exception from the ordinance.
So lastly, with all those questions answered, I would just suggest that that I think broadly this is a good thing. As Mr. Wood mentioned, the system is old and needs to be updated. It's non-functional in a lot of areas. But I'm concerned that we're at January 21st, 22nd right now, and that people would need to be fully switched over under the current text by January, I think, 6th of 2026, which is less than a year away now. And this this still has to go through the full council process. Again, I'll just reiterate that fire alarm systems can be expensive. The programming is expensive. These people are booked out for months. It takes a long time to get them in. That's something that we've dealt with, and I think Mr. Wood can attest to that's a real thing. So I think the timeline on this is a little bit aggressive, I would say, and maybe we should look at giving people more time. I mean, 8-9 months I don't think is enough time, and people have had years on the downtown project, and they weren't ready for that. So this could really have a real financial impact on the buildings that need to move away from the master box system and into one of the other approved systems. So I would suggest that the timeline be less aggressive, or provide for maybe an alternative. If somebody can't get somebody out there, they can't afford it, maybe they can put a plan in with the fire department, the fire marshal's office, so that at least they're working towards getting upgraded. But I think to just say by January 6th, the entire city is going to be moved away from one system and into the new one, I think that's very aggressive. And those are my comments.
Thank you for your questions. Your comments are duly noted. Any further questions up here in the committee at this point? Any further questions from the audience? Thank you very much. And a good question and answer also. Very, what motion is this?
Mr. Chair, if I
hold
may,
on.
I just
You got
want
some more?
Yeah, I just want to comment on the timeline piece, right?
That's fine. Yep.
The balance we're trying to strike here is between the aging system and maintaining it for that period of time, because obviously there's liability if the system doesn't work. So we're trying to balance that along with that interest, and that's why January was selected. Certainly, if we need to do something a little bit different, we can look at that, but that's why. I just wanted the group to know.
Nope, I appreciate that. Okay, you guys good? Further comments? City manager, you good? City attorney's happy?
Well, you'll notice that the requested motion is to place it on more time.
Right.
One more cycle. We do need to do some wordsmithing.
Right.
To the ordinance. Substantively, at this point, nothing is expected to change.
Okay.
But there are some changes we still need to
Got to
make.
give you something to do before you leave.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure we will find something. Further comments? Okay, motion, one more time.
Move to recommend the ordinance relating to master boxes be placed on more time.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further comment?
Just real quick. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm thinking this, as I'm saying, I'm like, this maybe I should save for when it comes back, but I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to thinking more about that, the timeline of January 6, 2026, as we move forward with this.
Yep.
But I'm not sure that's wordsmithing, so.
Okay, thanks. Further comment? Motion is moved and seconded for more time. All those in favor? More time it is. You'll be back. Thank you very much. Good presentation, good question and answer. Okay, with that said, where are we here? We're moving down the road. Number 8, another stop sign tonight. Public Works, come on down. This one's Jennison Street.
For the record, Brian Ruff, city engineer. This was heard in front of MSFI December 18th. It's essentially revising the city code to add a stop sign at Jennison Street for northbound traffic at the intersection with Foster Street. The draft ordinance is in your package for your use. It's pretty straightforward.
Right.
Happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Yeah, it is pretty straightforward. It's already been here. Any comments from the committee? Okay, motion, please.
Move to recommend the adoption of ordinance O 2025-04.
Second.
Motion's moved and seconded. Any further questions? All those in favor? 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Last item on the agenda has to do with loading zones. We do get done one more time.
Last but not least, Mr. Chair, Don Lucia, Public Works Director. It occurs to me as I'm coming up here tonight that this was placed on more time during a previous meeting, specifically because Chair Greenwald had some questions and was looking for some additional information. So if this is something that, you want to wait for the chair to come back before you take a vote, I wouldn't, have any, heartburn or I wouldn't take offense to that. But in any event.
Just to let you know, Councilor Greenwald contacted me, and he's not losing any sleep down in Brazil over this one. So he said he said we can move forward with this.
I was hoping that he was fretting about this issue.
He might be watching us right now. I don't know.
So the last time we were talking about this, and if Logan, if you can bring up the graphics again.
You broke it.
Logan. Okay, not working, okay. So the graphics that I was gonna show are included in your packet, I believe. Unfortunately, the Chair Greenwald won't be able to view it in Belize, but that'll be okay. So the question that came up last time is if all of the areas that were proposed, specifically on Gilboa Ave, were needed for the bus loading zone, or if they could be sort of trimmed down to leave some space for just normal vehicle loading, unloading of trucks and whatnot, and then preserve some space for the buses. So, and the committee asked me to come back with some dimensions so that you could better understand that. So the first graphic here is Roxbury Street. This is, exactly what we described last time, just showing with the dimensions. That indented portion in front of Central Square Terrace is 99 feet long. We're proposing that 50 feet of that be designated as the bus loading zone, and that would leave enough space for 2 normal car-sized loading spaces. The next one is the Gilboa Ave that we had questions about last time. That area is about 95 feet long, the curb line in front of the transportation center. So we're proposing that 50 feet be preserved for the buses, and again, leaving 45 feet, enough for 2 normal car or truck, small truck parking areas. If it was a Cisco truck or something like that, a box van, it would probably take up both of those spaces, and that would be okay. And then the final version, which, really, I just included for completeness, but this one is 33 feet long along the curb line. The tapers are much longer. You can see it has very gradual tapers in and out. I don't think anybody is really confusing this one with anything but a bus stop. So this one is really just included in the ordinance because it's just to be consistent with the other treatment. And with that, I would be happy to take your questions.
Questions? None? No question? Huh? You broken?
My mic is not.
There you go.
Thanks, thank you. Quick question in terms of clearing snow and anything else that's placed in there. Would the expectation of a bus stop versus a loading zone mean that the snow would be cleared from that area?
We would maintain them exactly the same in the winter. That they would be cleared. They would be part of that sort of overnight, no parking on the street where we go around and we clean up the nooks and the crannies. That would be done at that time. Does that answer your question?
I think so. That's how it is right now? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further comments from the committee at all? This is one of these ordinances that I'm not going to fall on the sword either way for. If the majority of the council wants to go with it, so be it. City Manager, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I just think that this was a good resolution to Councilor Greenwald's concerns. It provides for the loading zone space and the bus parking space as well.
Okay. And if Councilor Greenwald doesn't like it, he doesn't go to Brazil next time. Okay, who's trying for a motion?
I move to recommend the adoption of ordinance O-2024-16-A.
Second?
Motion is moved and seconded. Further comments from the committee? All those in favor? 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody have anything exciting to add to tonight outside of a newly married city manager? Congratulations. Did we take a motion to even vote in favor of that? I'm not sure. Okay, with that said, we're adjourned. Everybody stay warm tonight.